Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're going to slow things down a little bit. I know a lot of you watch these videos to wind down, maybe right before bed, maybe just to take a break from whatever's going on in your life. So grab a blanket, get comfortable, and let's read through some stories together. Some of these are going to be heavy. Some of them are going to make you think about your own life, your own relationships, the people you trust, and the ones who maybe shouldn't have had that trust in the first place. The thumbnail for tonight says it all. He made me homeless. And that's where we're going to start. With stories about betrayal, about family, about the people who were supposed to be there for us but somehow ended up being the ones who hurt us the most. So let's just take it slow tonight. There's no rush. Just you and me and these stories while the Minecraft world drifts by in the background. Our first story comes from someone who learned the hard way that family doesn't always mean safety. This one really stuck with me because it shows how quickly everything can fall apart when the people you depend on decide to change the rules without telling you. My father made me effectively homeless by backing out of our agreement at the last minute. I'm a 22-year-old guy and I moved out of my dad's house about a year and a half ago. When I left, we had a deal. He told me that if things ever got too hard financially, I could always come back home. I'm a university student working full-time, so money has always been tight. But knowing I had that safety net made it easier to take the leap. My lease was ending on September 1st, and starting around July, my dad and I had been talking about me moving back in. We were in full agreement. I was making plans based on that. I didn't look for a new apartment because I thought I had somewhere to go. Then, about 2 weeks before my lease ended, my dad called and told me I couldn't come back. Just like that. No warning, no discussion, just a complete reversal of everything we had agreed on. I tried to make my case. I reminded him that we had been planning this for months, that I had made decisions based on his word, but he wasn't budging. He told me I needed to grow up and handle my problems like an adult, as if I hadn't been doing exactly that for the past year and a half while working full-time and going to school. The thing that really hurt was finding out why he changed his mind. He has a new girlfriend. She moved in with him, and apparently she didn't want me there. So instead of standing by his promise to his own son, he chose her comfort over my housing situation. He just effectively made me homeless because his new relationship took priority. At that point, most landlords weren't even renting for September 1st anymore. Everything was already taken. I had to scramble to find somewhere to couch surf for at least a month, maybe longer, until I could find a place for October, all because my dad decided his promise to me didn't matter anymore. I keep replaying the conversation in my head, the coldness in his voice when he told me to figure it out, the way he made me feel like I was being unreasonable for expecting him to keep his word. I wasn't asking for charity. I was asking for the safety net he had offered me, the one he had promised would always be there. Some people might say that at 22 I should be able to handle myself. And normally I would agree. But this wasn't about being unable to support myself. This was about making plans based on someone's word and having that word mean nothing. If he had told me months ago that moving back wasn't an option, I would have found another apartment. I would have made other arrangements. But he waited until it was too late, and now I'm paying the price for his broken promise. The hardest part is knowing that he chose someone he's known for, maybe a year over me, his own son. I'm not saying he shouldn't be in a relationship. I want him to be happy. But how do you tell your kid they can count on you and then pull the rug out from under them because your new partner doesn't want them around? I've been staying with co-workers who offered to let me crash until I figure things out. They've been more reliable than my own father. And that's something I'll carry with me for a long time. The people who were supposed to be there weren't. And strangers stepped up when family stepped back. That story really hits different when you think about how much we build our lives around the promises people make to us. Trust is such a fragile thing. You give it freely to the people you love, and sometimes they just shatter it without even understanding what they've done. Let's move on to another story. This one is about a mother who took her concern for her child to a level that destroyed everything. My mum got me fired from my dream job because she thought my boss was being mean to me. I'm 24 years old, and after graduating college, I finally landed my dream job at a prestigious marketing firm in downtown Seattle. This position was everything I had worked for. It was creative, challenging, and had amazing growth potential. I was so excited to start my career and prove myself in the professional world. My boss, Jennifer, was tough but fair. She had high standards and wasn't afraid to give direct feedback when something needed improvement. Coming from college, where professors often softened their criticism, it was definitely an adjustment, but I appreciated her honesty because I knew it would make me better at my job. She was the kind of leader who pushed you to excel, and I respected that about her. About 2 months into the job, I was working on a major campaign for a tech startup. It was my first big solo project, and I was nervous but excited to show what I could do. I had been putting in long hours researching the target demographic and crafting what I thought was a brilliant strategy. When I presented it to Jennifer, she pointed out several flaws in my approach and told me to start over. I was disappointed, but I understood her feedback. The strategy I had developed was too generic and didn't really capture what made this startup unique. She was right, and I knew I could do better. I went home that night determined to create something amazing. I called my mum to vent about my frustration and get some encouragement like I always did when things got tough. I explained how my boss had rejected my first draft and asked me to completely rethink my approach. I told her about the specific feedback Jennifer had given me and how I planned to incorporate those suggestions into a stronger campaign. My mum listened and seemed supportive, telling me that everyone faces setbacks and that this was just part of learning the business. What I didn't realize was that she had been taking mental notes about everything I told her about work. She knew my boss's name, where I worked, and apparently had been forming her own opinions about whether Jennifer was treating me fairly. In her mind, any criticism of her precious daughter was automatically unfair and mean-spirited. The next morning, I arrived at work, excited to present my revised strategy to Jennifer. I had worked until midnight perfecting every detail, and I was confident this version captured exactly what the client needed. But when I walked into the office, the receptionist gave me a strange look and told me Jennifer wanted to see me immediately. I knocked on Jennifer's door and she invited me in, but her expression was cold and professional in a way I hadn't seen before. She closed the door behind me and asked me to sit down. Then she said, "We need to talk about the phone call I received yesterday from your mother." My stomach dropped. Apparently, while I was working on my revised campaign, my mum had decided to call my office and give Jennifer a piece of her mind. She had introduced herself as my mother and proceeded to lecture my boss about proper management techniques and how to treat young employees with respect. She told Jennifer that making me start over was discouraging and unprofessional. My mum had apparently spent 20 minutes on the phone, explaining how hard I had worked on the original campaign and how Jennifer's feedback was crushing my spirit. She suggested that maybe Jennifer needed to learn better communication skills and that experienced managers should know how to motivate rather than tear down their employees. I wanted to disappear into the floor. I couldn't believe my mother had called my workplace and confronted my boss about giving me professional feedback. It was mortifying, and I knew immediately that this was a career-ending mistake. Jennifer told me that while she understood my mum meant well, having family members call to argue about work decisions was completely inappropriate. She explained that in a professional environment, employees need to be able to handle feedback and criticism independently, and that my mother's call raised serious questions about my maturity and readiness for the corporate world. She said she couldn't have team members whose parents might call to complain whenever they received constructive criticism. Jennifer was professional but firm. She told me that this incident made her question whether I was ready for the responsibilities of the position and that the company couldn't risk having family members interfere with business operations. She gave me the option to resign or be terminated for unprofessional conduct. I chose to resign because I didn't want a termination on my record, but I was devastated. This was my dream job, and I had been working so hard to prove myself. Now it was over, because my mum had decided to fight my battles for me like I was still in elementary school. I packed up my desk in shame while my co-workers whispered and stared. When I got home, I confronted my mum about what she had done. She seemed genuinely surprised that I was upset. She said she was just trying to help and that she couldn't stand to see her daughter being treated poorly by a mean boss. She insisted that Jennifer was out of line and that any good manager would have appreciated her feedback. I tried to explain that what she did was career suicide and that I would now have to explain this situation in future job interviews. My mum got defensive and said that if Jennifer couldn't handle a concerned parent, then maybe it wasn't the right place for me anyway. She seemed to think she had done me a favour by exposing my boss's true character. It took me 4 months to find another job, and even then I had to take a significant pay cut and start at a much smaller company. The whole experience taught me that I needed to set serious boundaries with my mum about my professional life, but it also cost me the career opportunity I had worked so hard to achieve. The worst part is that my mum still doesn't understand what she did wrong. She occasionally asks if I've heard from Jennifer and suggests that maybe I should go back and ask for my job because surely they've realised their mistake by now. She lives in this alternate reality where she was the hero protecting her daughter from workplace bullying. That's not helicopter parenting. That's something else entirely. When your love for your child blinds you to the harm you're causing them, when your need to protect becomes the very thing that destroys their opportunities, that's when the line gets crossed in ways that can never be undone. Let's take a breath here. I know these stories are heavy, but sometimes it helps to hear about other people's struggles, to know that you're not alone in the complicated relationships you navigate. Family is supposed to be our foundation, but sometimes that foundation has cracks we don't see until it's too late. Our next story comes from someone who learned that some people will literally try to claim ownership of things that don't belong to them just because they want them more. My neighbour demanded I give her my car because she has kids and I don't. I'm 23 years old and I live in a small apartment complex in Phoenix. I work remotely as a graphic designer, which means I don't drive to an office every day, but I do need my car for groceries, appointments, and visiting family. About 6 months ago, a new family moved into the unit next to mine. A single mum named Linda, with 3 kids aged 5, 8, and 10. Linda seemed nice enough at first. We'd wave in the hallway and make small talk about the weather or the building's broken elevator. Her kids were loud, but not unusually so for apartment living. I figured we'd be the kind of neighbours who keep to ourselves but stay cordial when we cross paths. About a month after she moved in, Linda knocked on my door one evening. She explained that her car had broken down and she needed to get her youngest to a doctor's appointment the next morning. She asked if she could borrow my car for a few hours. I was hesitant because I barely knew her, but she seemed desperate and it was just for a medical emergency, so I agreed. She returned the car with a full tank of gas and was incredibly grateful. She thanked me multiple times and said she'd never forget my kindness. I felt good about helping a neighbour in need and figured that would be the end of it. But apparently, Linda took my one-time favour as an invitation to treat my car like her personal vehicle. 2 weeks later, she knocked again. This time, she needed to take her middle child to soccer practice, and her car was in the shop again. I reluctantly agreed because I didn't have any plans that evening, but I mentioned that I couldn't make this a regular thing. She nodded and promised it would just be this once, but the requests kept coming. Every few weeks, Linda would appear at my door with a new transportation emergency. Her car was getting repaired. Her sister couldn't give her a ride. She had to pick up groceries for all 3 kids. Each time she'd emphasize how much harder everything was for her as a single mother, and how lucky I was to not have those responsibilities. I started to feel manipulated, but I also felt guilty saying no to someone who clearly struggled financially. The turning point came when Linda started assuming she could use my car without asking. She'd text me things like, "Need the car for 2 hours tomorrow afternoon," or "Can you leave the keys under my mat? I have an early appointment." I realized she had completely crossed the line from asking favors to expecting access to my property. I decided to have a conversation with her about boundaries. I knocked on her door one Saturday morning and explained that while I wanted to help when there were true emergencies, I needed my car to be available for my own needs. I suggested she look into public transportation or rideshare services for regular activities. Linda's reaction was not what I expected. Instead of understanding, she became defensive and angry. She said that I was being selfish and that people without children couldn't possibly understand the challenges of single parenthood. She accused me of having a car that just sits in the parking lot most days while her family suffered without reliable transportation. I tried to stay calm and reiterated that my car was my property and my responsibility. I explained that I had been more than generous with lending it out, but that I needed to prioritize my own needs. She rolled her eyes and said that people like me were the reason society was falling apart because we only cared about ourselves. The conversation ended awkwardly, but I thought I had made my position clear. I stopped responding to her texts about borrowing the car and avoided making eye contact when we passed in the hallway. I hoped she would get the message and find alternative transportation solutions. But Linda wasn't done. A few weeks later, I came home from grocery shopping to find her waiting by my car in the parking lot. She approached me as I was unloading bags and said we needed to talk. She explained that she had been thinking about our situation and had come up with what she called a fair solution. Linda proposed that since I didn't really need my car every day, and she had 3 children who needed to get to school activities and appointments, we should work out a shared custody arrangement. She suggested that she could have access to the car Monday through Friday during school hours, and I could have it evenings and weekends. I stared at her in disbelief. This woman was seriously suggesting that I should give her regular access to my car because she had decided her needs were more important than mine. I told her that wasn't going to happen, and that she needed to find her own transportation solutions. Linda's expression changed from hopeful to furious. She started yelling about how selfish and heartless I was. She said that anyone with basic human decency would help a struggling mother, and that my refusal to share proved I was a terrible person. She accused me of letting innocent children suffer because I was too greedy to share my resources. She went on a rant about how people without kids didn't deserve the same privileges as parents because they didn't have real responsibilities. She said the world would be a better place if selfish people like me were forced to help families in need instead of hoarding resources we didn't even use. I was so shocked by her entitlement that I could barely respond. I managed to say that my car was not community property and that her transportation problems were not my responsibility. Then I walked away while she continued yelling about my selfishness loud enough for the whole complex to hear. The next morning, I found a note under my door. It was 3 pages long and detailed all the reasons why Linda deserved access to my car more than I did. She had calculated how many miles I drove per week versus how many miles she needed and determined that her usage would be more efficient. She even included a proposed schedule for sharing. The note also contained guilt trips about her children missing opportunities because their mother couldn't drive them places. She wrote about how my refusal was directly harming 3 innocent kids, and that I would have to live with that on my conscience. She ended by saying she was willing to pay me $20 a month for the privilege of using my car during the week. I showed the note to my boyfriend, who couldn't believe someone would actually write something so entitled. He suggested I report it to the apartment management since Linda was clearly harassing me about my personal property. I decided to keep the note as evidence in case things escalated further. They did escalate. Linda began parking her broken-down car behind mine, so I couldn't leave without asking her to move it. She claimed it was the only available spot, but there were clearly other spaces in the lot. When I confronted her about it, she acted innocent and said she had every right to park there. She also started making passive-aggressive comments whenever she saw me in the hallway. Things like, "Must be nice to have a working car sitting unused," or "Some people don't know how good they have it." Her kids seemed embarrassed by her behaviour and would avoid eye contact when she made these remarks. Finally, I had enough. I went to the apartment office and filed a complaint about harassment. The property manager was sympathetic and said they'd received similar complaints about Linda from other residents. Apparently she had also asked several neighbours to babysit her kids for free and had gotten angry when they refused. The manager spoke with Linda about appropriate neighbour relationships and warned her that continued harassment could result in eviction. I don't know exactly what was said, but Linda stopped bothering me about my car after that conversation. She also moved her car to a different parking spot. We still see each other occasionally in the hallway, but we don't speak. Linda gives me dirty looks and sometimes makes comments under her breath, but I ignore her completely. Her kids seem like they're doing fine despite not having regular access to my vehicle, which proves that she was perfectly capable of finding other solutions all along. Looking back, I realise I should have set boundaries much earlier instead of enabling her sense of entitlement by repeatedly saying yes to her requests. But I learned an important lesson about how some people will take advantage of kindness and turn it into an expectation of ongoing service. The entitlement in that story is something else entirely. Some people genuinely believe that their circumstances entitle them to other people's property, time, and resources. And when you push back, they act like you're the villain in their story. Let's slow down for a moment. These stories about boundaries and broken trust, they're exhausting to even hear about. Imagine living them. Imagine being in the middle of that chaos, trying to figure out where you went wrong, or if you went wrong at all. Sometimes we feel guilty for saying no, for putting ourselves first. But the thing is, you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't sacrifice everything you have for people who will never be satisfied, who will always want more, who will never acknowledge your generosity because they've decided they deserve it. Let's read one more story before we take a longer pause. This one involves the kind of betrayal that cuts deepest because it comes from the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally. My sister-in-law tried to force me to sell my house to her for half price because her daughter loved it. I'm 29 and my husband Alex is 31. We've been married for 3 years and we recently bought our first home together. It's a beautiful colonial-style house with 4 bedrooms, a big backyard, and it's in an excellent school district. We saved for years to afford the down payment, and we're incredibly proud of our new place. Alex has a younger sister, Jessica, who's 35 and married with 2 kids, a 7-year-old daughter named Chloe and a 4-year-old son. The family dynamic has always been complicated because Jessica was the golden child growing up, and she still expects everyone to cater to her wishes, even as an adult. When we invited the extended family over for a housewarming party, everyone was complimentary about our new place. We gave tours, showed off the renovations we'd done, and talked about our plans for the backyard. Jessica seemed happy for us, and her kids had fun running around exploring all the rooms. Chloe was particularly enchanted with the house. She kept asking questions about every room and talked about how much she loved the reading nook we'd created in one of the bedrooms. She was sweet about it, and we enjoyed seeing the house through a child's eyes. It felt good to know that our hard work had created a space that felt magical to someone so young. About a week after the party, Jessica called and asked if she could bring Chloe over to see the house again. She said her daughter hadn't stopped talking about it and wanted to show her some ideas she had for decorating. I thought it was cute and invited them over for the weekend. During that visit, Chloe was even more excited about the house than before. She had apparently been drawing pictures of her favourite rooms and had ideas about where she'd put her toys if she lived there. Jessica encouraged this behaviour and kept asking me detailed questions about our mortgage payments, property taxes, and what we thought the house was worth. I found the financial questions odd, but assumed Jessica was just curious about home ownership, since she and her husband had been renting for years. I answered politely, but started to feel uncomfortable when she began taking notes about everything I told her. A few days later, Jessica called and asked if we could meet for coffee. She said she had something important to discuss. I assumed she wanted advice about house hunting since she'd been asking so many questions about home ownership. But what she proposed was completely insane. Jessica explained that Chloe had been crying every night since visiting our house because she wanted to live there so badly. She said her daughter had never connected with a place like this before and that it was clearly meant to be their family home. She spoke as if the house had chosen Chloe rather than us having bought it. Then came the proposal. Jessica suggested that since Chloe loved the house so much, and since we didn't have children yet, we should consider selling it to her family. She acknowledged that they couldn't afford the full market value, but offered to buy it for exactly half of what we paid. She was essentially asking us to take a massive financial loss so her daughter could have her dream house. I was speechless. The audacity of asking us to sell our home at a huge loss just because her child liked it was beyond anything I could have imagined. Jessica seemed to interpret my silence as consideration rather than shock, and continued explaining why this arrangement would benefit everyone. She argued that we were young and could easily find another house, whereas Chloe was at a crucial age where stability and the right environment were essential. She claimed that children's needs should always come first, and that we'd understand once we had kids of our own. She made it sound like keeping our own house was somehow selfish. Jessica also mentioned that the house was too big for just the 2 of us, and that a family with children would make better use of the space. She said it seemed wasteful for us to have 4 bedrooms when we only needed 1, and that Chloe could really flourish in such a beautiful environment. I finally found my voice and told Jessica that we weren't interested in selling our house at any price, let alone for half its value. I explained that this was our dream home too, and that we had worked incredibly hard to afford it. Her reaction was immediate and explosive. She accused me of being heartless and selfish. She said that anyone who truly loved children would want to see them happy, and that my refusal was devastating to Chloe. She claimed that I was putting money above a child's emotional well-being, and that this would traumatize her daughter. Jessica then tried a different approach. She suggested that maybe we could work out a rent-to-own arrangement where they would live in the house and gradually buy it from us over time. She proposed that they pay us what they currently paid in rent, which was about a third of our mortgage payment. When I again said no, Jessica became increasingly desperate. She offered to let us live in their rental apartment, which was a tiny 2-bedroom place in a much less desirable neighbourhood. She seemed to genuinely believe this was a fair trade and couldn't understand why I wasn't jumping at the opportunity. The conversation ended with Jessica storming out of the coffee shop, but not before telling everyone within earshot that I was refusing to help a child in need. She made it sound like I was denying medicine to a sick kid rather than declining to sell my house at a massive loss. Over the next few weeks, Jessica launched a full-scale campaign to pressure us into selling. She called other family members to explain the situation from her perspective, making it sound like we were being unreasonably stubborn about helping Chloe. She conveniently left out the part about expecting us to lose nearly $100,000 in the process. Alex's parents called to ask if we'd consider Jessica's offer. They had been told that it was just a matter of price negotiation, not that she wanted us to essentially give away half the value of our home. When Alex explained the real numbers, his parents were shocked and immediately stopped pressuring us. Jessica also tried to use Chloe as emotional leverage. She would bring her daughter to family gatherings and have her talk about how sad she was that she couldn't live in the pretty house. Chloe would ask me directly why I wouldn't let her family live there, and it was clear she'd been coached on what to say. The whole situation reached a breaking point at Alex's birthday dinner. Jessica stood up during dessert and made a speech about family priorities. She talked about how some people put material possessions above the happiness of children and how disappointing it was to see such selfishness within the family. Everyone at the table knew she was talking about me, and the room became incredibly uncomfortable. Alex finally stood up and told his sister that her behaviour was inappropriate and that she needed to stop harassing us about our house. He made it clear that we would never sell and that she needed to find another solution for her housing situation. Jessica broke down crying and accused Alex of choosing me over his own niece. She said that his loyalty should be to his family first, and that I had obviously poisoned him against his sister. Several other family members tried to calm the situation, but Jessica was inconsolable. She eventually left the restaurant with her family, but not before announcing that she would never forgive us for crushing her daughter's dreams. She said that every time Chloe asked about the house, she would have to explain that her aunt and uncle cared more about money than her happiness. In the weeks that followed, Jessica continued to post passive-aggressive messages on social media about people who have more than they need while children suffer. She never mentioned us by name, but the context was obvious to anyone who knew about the house situation. Eventually, Jessica and her husband did find a house to buy in a different school district. It's smaller than ours and not as updated, but it's a perfectly nice home for their family. Chloe seems happy there and has stopped asking about our house, though Jessica still makes occasional comments about how things could have been different. The whole experience taught me that some people feel entitled to other people's property just because they want it more. Jessica genuinely believed that her daughter's desire for our house was more important than our right to own it. She couldn't comprehend why we wouldn't sacrifice our financial security for her child's preference. That story shows how entitlement can warp someone's perspective so completely that they genuinely believe they're the victim when people refuse to give them what they want. It's a kind of delusional thinking that protects them from ever having to question their own behaviour. Let's take a moment here to breathe. The Minecraft world keeps spinning in the background, peaceful and quiet, while we process these stories of human complexity. Sometimes people disappoint us. Sometimes they betray us. And sometimes they reveal sides of themselves we never knew existed. The next story we're going to read is particularly difficult because it involves a child's safety and a grandmother who put her own beliefs above her granddaughter's life. My mother-in-law brought my severely allergic daughter peanut butter cookies because she doesn't believe in food allergies. I'm 28 and my husband David is 30. We have a 4-year-old daughter named Lily who was diagnosed with a severe peanut allergy when she was 18 months old. We discovered it the hard way when she had a reaction to a peanut butter sandwich at daycare and had to be rushed to the emergency room in an ambulance. Since then, we've been incredibly careful about managing Lily's allergy. We carry EpiPens everywhere we go. We read every ingredient label. We communicate with teachers and caregivers about her condition. And we've educated our family and friends about the seriousness of her allergy. Lily's reaction isn't mild. She doesn't just get a rash or an upset stomach. Exposure to peanuts causes her throat to swell, her breathing to become laboured, and her blood pressure to drop dangerously. This is anaphylaxis, and it can be fatal without immediate treatment. We've had to use her EpiPen twice in the past 2 years. My mother-in-law, Carmen, has always been sceptical about Lily's allergy. She comes from a generation that didn't really deal with food allergies, and she seems to think they're a modern invention or an excuse for picky eating. She's made comments about how kids in her day ate everything and turned out fine. Despite our repeated explanations about the severity of Lily's condition, Carmen continues to minimize it. She suggested that we're being overprotective and that exposure therapy might help Lily outgrow her allergy faster. She's even implied that we're limiting Lily's childhood experiences unnecessarily. We've had several conversations with Carmen about being careful with food around Lily. We've explained that even trace amounts of peanuts can trigger a reaction and that cross-contamination is a real concern. We've asked her to check ingredient labels and to let us know what she's planning to serve when Lily visits. Carmen always agrees to be careful, but then makes comments about how complicated everything has become and how she managed to raise 3 children without worrying about every little ingredient. She seems to view our precautions as excessive anxiety rather than necessary medical management. Last weekend, Carmen offered to babysit Lily while David and I went to a wedding. We were hesitant because of past issues, but Carmen had been on her best behaviour lately, and we really needed the help. We went over all of Lily's safety protocols, gave Carmen our emergency contacts, and left detailed instructions. We also left safe snacks that Lily could eat, and reminded Carmen not to give her anything we hadn't approved. Carmen nodded along and assured us that she understood the importance of keeping Lily safe. We felt confident that she would follow our guidelines. The wedding was beautiful, and we were having a great time until David's phone rang around 8 o'clock in the evening. It was Carmen, and she sounded panicked. She said that Lily was having trouble breathing and that she didn't know what to do. We immediately told her to call 911 and said we were on our way. We broke every speed limit, getting to the hospital where we found Lily in the emergency room with an oxygen mask over her face. She was conscious but clearly struggling to breathe. The medical team was monitoring her vital signs and had already administered epinephrine. Carmen was in the waiting room crying and saying she didn't understand what had happened. The doctor pulled us aside and explained that Lily had experienced severe anaphylaxis and that she was lucky Carmen had called for help when she did. A few more minutes could have been catastrophic. When we asked Carmen what had happened, she became defensive and evasive. She kept saying that she'd only given Lily approved foods and that she couldn't understand why this had occurred. It wasn't until we pressed her repeatedly that the truth finally came out. Carmen admitted that she had made peanut butter cookies for Lily because she wanted to test whether the allergy was real. She said she'd only given Lily a small bite and had been watching carefully to see what would happen. She genuinely believed that exposure in a controlled environment would prove that we were overreacting. I was so angry I couldn't speak. David was furious and asked his mother how she could risk their daughter's life to prove a point. Carmen started crying and saying that she never thought anything serious would happen. She claimed she was trying to help by showing us that Lily didn't really have an allergy. The medical team had to explain to Carmen that what she had done was essentially poisoning a child with a known severe allergy. They told her that anaphylaxis can be fatal and that her experiment could have killed Lily. Carmen seemed genuinely shocked that her actions had been so dangerous. Lily had to stay in the hospital overnight for observation, which was terrifying for all of us. She didn't understand why she couldn't breathe properly and kept asking if she was going to be okay. Seeing our 4-year-old hooked up to monitors because of her grandmother's reckless experiment was heartbreaking. When we got home the next day, I told David that Carmen was no longer allowed to be alone with Lily ever again. I couldn't trust someone who would deliberately expose our child to a life-threatening allergen to prove their point about modern parenting being too cautious. Carmen called repeatedly over the next few days, trying to apologize and explain that she'd made a mistake. She kept saying that she loves Lily and would never intentionally hurt her, but the damage was done. She had shown that her need to be right was more important than our daughter's safety. She also tried to shift blame by saying that if the allergy was really that severe, we should have been more explicit about the consequences. This was particularly infuriating since we'd had countless conversations about the seriousness of Lily's condition, including showing her photos of previous reactions. David supported my decision to cut off Carmen's unsupervised access to Lily, but it caused a huge rift in his family. His father called us unreasonable and said that Carmen had learned her lesson. His siblings were divided, with some understanding our position and others thinking we were being too harsh. The family drama escalated when Carmen started telling relatives her version of events, where she was a concerned grandmother who made an innocent mistake and we were vindictive parents who were keeping her from her granddaughter. She left out the part about deliberately feeding peanuts to a severely allergic child. Several family members reached out to mediate and suggest compromise solutions like supervised visits or family counselling. But I remained firm that Carmen couldn't be trusted alone with Lily. The hospital bill alone was over $3,000, not to mention the trauma Lily experienced. Months later, Carmen still doesn't fully grasp the severity of what she did. She's apologized for the outcome, but never acknowledged that deliberately exposing Lily to peanuts was attempted harm. She still frames it as a well-intentioned mistake rather than a dangerous violation of trust. We've started seeing a family therapist who specializes in medical trauma to help Lily process what happened. She's developed anxiety around eating and sometimes asks if her food is safe, even when we've prepared it ourselves. The psychological impact of her grandmother's experiment will likely last years. Carmen continues to ask when she can see Lily again and suggests that we're punishing her too harshly for one mistake. But keeping our daughter alive isn't punishment. It's our primary responsibility as parents, and we can't risk another experiment in Carmen's ongoing denial about food allergies. That story genuinely made me angry while researching it. The arrogance required to deliberately endanger a child just to prove a point about allergies being fake is something I struggle to understand. Medical science isn't up for debate, and when you're dealing with a child's life, your personal beliefs about whether allergies are real don't matter. Let's shift to something different now. A story about siblings and the complicated dynamics that can develop when one person always seems to get preferential treatment. My wealthy parents abandoned me as a child, and now that I'm successful, they want me to save them from homelessness. I'm 23 years old now, and looking back at my childhood, I can see all the signs I missed when I was too young to understand what was happening. Growing up, I was the scapegoat of my family. My parents had 3 kids, and for reasons I never understood, they seemed to hate me from the moment I could form memories. My older brother and younger sister were treated like royalty, while I was treated like a burden that they couldn't wait to get rid of. My parents would make me do all the household chores while my siblings relaxed. They bought my brother and sister nice clothes for school while I wore hand-me-downs that were often too big or too worn out. They paid for my siblings' extracurricular activities and summer camps while telling me there wasn't enough money for me to participate in anything. The worst part was the emotional neglect. My parents would go days without speaking to me directly. They would leave me at home when they took my siblings on family outings. They forgot my birthday multiple times, claiming they had too much going on to remember. Meanwhile, my brother and sister got elaborate parties with all their friends invited. When I was 13, my mother hit me with her car in a family vacation incident that left my leg broken. It wasn't treated for 2 weeks until we got back home. No one helped me. No one seemed to care that I was in pain. I was just expected to deal with it. At 16, I finally escaped. I found ways to support myself through odd jobs and eventually connected with my grandparents, who had been kept at a distance by my parents. They were horrified to learn how I had been treated and immediately took me in. My grandparents changed everything for me. They paid for my education, supported my dreams, and gave me the love and stability I had never known. With their help, I started an online business that took off beyond my wildest expectations. Within 5 years, I had built multiple businesses and made smart investments in real estate. I was making more money than my parents had ever made combined. During the pandemic, my parents' restaurant failed and they started struggling financially. They couldn't make their mortgage payments and were facing the very real possibility of losing their house. When they found out about my success, they started calling me begging for help. My mother, the same woman who had run over my leg and left it untreated for weeks, was now crying on the phone asking me to save their home. She talked about how they had always loved me in their own way and that families should support each other in difficult times. I listened to her plead for money while remembering all the times they had made me feel worthless, all the birthdays they forgot, all the opportunities they denied me, all the love they withheld while showering it on my siblings. When I told them no, they accused me of being vindictive and holding on to the past. They said I was punishing them for mistakes they made when they were younger and more foolish. They claimed that I should be grateful they raised me at all. What they don't understand is that they didn't raise me. My grandparents raised me. They just kept me alive long enough for me to escape, and now they want me to reward them for that bare minimum. I used my success to buy my grandparents their dream home and pay off my aunt's medical school debts. The people who actually cared about me got my help. The people who treated me like garbage got exactly what they gave me as a child. Nothing. My parents continued to spiral after I refused to help them. They lost their house and had to move in with relatives. They still tell everyone who will listen about how their ungrateful daughter abandoned them in their time of need. They paint themselves as victims while conveniently omitting the years of neglect and abuse they subjected me to. Some family members think I'm being too harsh. They say blood is thicker than water and that I should forgive and forget. But forgiveness doesn't mean I have to set myself on fire to keep someone else warm. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. And it certainly doesn't mean financially supporting people who made my childhood a living nightmare. I sleep well at night knowing that I chose myself over people who never chose me. I have no regrets about where my money goes and who it helps. The people who earned my love and loyalty get my support. The people who didn't get to deal with the consequences of their choices. That story really captures something important about how we're conditioned to believe family deserves our loyalty regardless of how they treat us. But the truth is, family is earned through actions, not just blood. And some people forfeit their right to call themselves family through years of neglect and cruelty. Let's read about someone whose roommate situation turned into an absolute nightmare. My roommate has been secretly pocketing my rent money for the last few months, and the landlord just confronted me about it. Long story short, my roommate Chad has never really given me reason to distrust him. He's always gone, travelling here and there, to Europe, to China, and other places. He met this girl online, and they're always travelling together. I don't care about his personal life. It's not my business. Our landlord and her son came by today, which is super rare. I've literally met them twice and have not seen them since. They informed me that our rent hasn't been paid in 3 months. I was completely shocked because I had been giving Chad my portion of the rent in cash every single month. I immediately texted Chad to ask what was going on. His response was absolutely infuriating. When I asked him directly if he had been pocketing my rent money, he replied with, "Don't hate me, hate the system, I grew up poor." The mental gymnastics involved in that response are absolutely wild. He's been taking my money, not paying the landlord, using it for his international trips with his girlfriend, and now he's blaming the system for his decision to steal from me. The landlord was actually pretty understanding once she realised I had been paying my share. She showed me the payment records, and it was clear that Chad had been collecting money from me and just keeping it. She gave me some time to figure things out, but I'm now scrambling to come up with months of back rent that I technically already paid once. I've been documenting everything, and I'm planning to file a police report. Chad keeps acting like what he did is somehow justified because he had a rough childhood. But plenty of people grow up with nothing and don't steal from their roommates. This wasn't survival. This was theft to fund vacations. The landlord advised me to go to small claims court and said she would provide any documentation I needed. Meanwhile, Chad has been dodging my calls and only responding with vague texts about how I need to understand his situation. I understand his situation perfectly. He's a thief who used our trust to steal thousands of dollars. There's no amount of childhood poverty that excuses betraying someone who considered you a friend. Stories like that remind me why trust is such a fragile thing. You can live with someone, share your space and your life with them, and still have no idea what they're really capable of until they reveal their true nature. Let me share a wedding story now. These always seem to bring out the most extreme behavior in people, probably because the stakes feel so high and emotions run so hot. My wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but my mother made sure to ruin it in ways I'm still processing months later. The problems started long before the ceremony, but they reached their peak on the day itself. My father got drunk before the ceremony even began. By the time I was supposed to walk down the aisle, he was barely coherent. He stumbled through the processional, making slurred comments loud enough for the guests to hear. My mother, instead of helping manage the situation, was nowhere to be found because she was busy complaining to anyone who would listen about how the flowers weren't arranged exactly the way she wanted. The photographer I had hired through a friend didn't capture any of the important moments. When I looked at the photos afterward, there were none of me walking up the aisle, none of my vows, none of the moments I had dreamed about documenting. She had been taking photos of random guests instead of the actual ceremony. My hair extensions, which I had specifically requested be fitted properly, came loose during the reception. I spent half of my own wedding trying to keep my hair from completely falling apart, while my husband tried to distract guests from noticing. The transportation fell through at the last minute, so instead of arriving at my wedding in the vintage car I had rented, I was driven by my brother-in-law in his regular car with just the radio playing. Not exactly the grand entrance I had imagined. One of my bridesmaids, who had shown absolutely no interest in being part of the wedding, had to be replaced weeks before the ceremony. But she was replaced by someone I barely knew, which made the whole wedding party feel awkward and disjointed. By the reception, I was just trying to get through the night. The DJ stopped the music early because apparently there was a noise curfew I hadn't been told about. Guests started leaving before we had even cut the cake because the atmosphere had become so uncomfortable. My mother spent the entire reception making comments about everything that was going wrong, as if she wasn't part of the problem. She kept saying things like, "Well, this isn't how I would have planned it, and I told you this venue was a mistake." She seemed more interested in being right than in helping me salvage what was left of my special day. My husband and I left our own wedding early because there was nothing left to celebrate. We went back to our hotel room and sat in silence, trying to process how everything had gone so wrong. Even our honeymoon was a disaster. We only had 2 nights away because of our kids, and on the second night, we went to see a movie and got locked in the theatre. The staff saw 2 people leave who had apparently snuck into our screening, assumed the theatre was empty, and locked up for the night. I couldn't see in the dark, and with a broken toe from a wedding day incident, I had to wait for the lights to finally turn on so we could find our way out. 6 months later, I still get upset when I think about that day. People keep asking to see photos, and I have to make excuses because there are barely any worth showing. My husband feels the same way. We both feel like our wedding was stolen from us by a combination of unreliable people and family members who cared more about themselves than about making our day special. The hardest part is that I can never get that day back. Other couples have beautiful memories and gorgeous photos to look back on. I have trauma and disappointment. And my mother still doesn't understand why I'm not grateful for the wedding she let happen. Wedding disasters hit differently because they're supposed to be celebrations of love and new beginnings. When they go wrong, especially because of the people who are supposed to support you, it taints what should have been pure joy. Let's take another breather here. The Minecraft world continues to drift by peacefully, and I hope these stories are giving you something to think about. Not in a distressing way, but in that contemplative way that sometimes comes when we hear about other people's struggles and realize how universal certain experiences are. Now I want to share a story about neighbors that escalated in ways nobody expected. My new neighbor reported my mum to the city for having an illegal shed in our backyard, so I got his $40,000 pool filled in with dirt. I live with my mum. She's quiet, keeps to herself, never bothers anyone. A few months ago, our new neighbour decided to report her to the city for having what he claimed was an illegal shed in our backyard. It was complete nonsense. The shed has been there for years and has full permits. An inspector came out, checked everything, and left without saying a word. We thought that would be the end of it. but the neighbour kept pushing. He would make comments over the fence about how the shed was an eyesore. He complained to other neighbours about us lowering property values. He was clearly upset that his complaint hadn't worked, and he couldn't seem to let it go, so I did a little digging. Turns out his brand new pool was way too close to the property line and had been illegally built over a utility easement. He hadn't gotten the proper permits, and the construction violated several city codes. Armed with documentation, photographs, and code references, I filed a formal complaint with the city. 2 weeks later, the city ordered him to either move the pool, which was impossible, or fill it in. He lost the whole thing, $40,000 down the drain, literally. Now he gets to look at our completely legal shed every day while standing over a pile of dirt where his pool used to be. My mum sleeps great now. The irony of that situation is almost poetic. He came after us with baseless accusations and ended up losing something much more valuable because of his own actual violations. Sometimes karma works in mysterious ways, and sometimes it works in very direct and satisfying ways. Let me share one more story about family dynamics and the complications that arise when someone's need for control overrides everyone else's well-being. My entitled father-in-law ruined my daughter's birthday party because he thought the theme was stupid. I have a 7-year-old daughter named Ruby who is absolutely obsessed with dinosaurs. Not princesses, not unicorns, but specifically paleontology and prehistoric creatures. She knows more about different dinosaur species than most adults, and she's been asking for a dinosaur-themed birthday party since January. My husband and I were thrilled to plan something special for her. We booked a community centre, ordered dinosaur decorations, and even hired a guy who does educational presentations with realistic dinosaur puppets. Ruby was over the moon with excitement, and she'd been telling everyone at school about her upcoming dinosaur adventure party. The problem started when my father-in-law, Frank, found out about the theme. Frank is one of those traditional guys who has very specific ideas about what little girls should like. When Ruby mentioned her dinosaur party during a family dinner, he laughed and said something about how she'd grow out of this phase soon enough. I should have seen the red flags then, but I assumed he was just making conversation. 2 weeks before the party, Frank called my husband and suggested we might want to reconsider the theme. He said he'd been thinking about it and maybe a dinosaur party wasn't appropriate for a little girl's birthday. He offered to pay for a princess party instead, complete with a dress-up station and a character appearance. My husband politely declined and explained that Ruby had specifically requested dinosaurs and was really excited about learning more about paleontology. Frank seemed to accept this, but he made some comment about how we were confusing her about gender roles and that she'd thank us later for steering her toward more feminine interests. I was annoyed, but figured he'd get over it once he saw how happy Ruby was at her party. The day of the party arrived, and everything was going perfectly. The community centre looked amazing with all our decorations. The dinosaur expert was setting up his presentation, and Ruby was glowing with excitement in her paleontologist costume, complete with a safari hat and toy excavation tools. Guests started arriving around 2 o'clock, and all the kids were immediately fascinated by the dinosaur displays we'd set up around the room. Ruby was in her element, explaining the difference between herbivores and carnivores to her friends and showing off her collection of fossil replicas. Frank arrived about 30 minutes into the party, and I could tell immediately that something was wrong. He looked around the room with this expression of barely concealed disgust, like we had decorated with garbage instead of carefully chosen dinosaur-themed items. But Frank wasn't just disapproving, he'd come prepared. He walked in carrying several large bags from a party store. And when I asked what they were for, he announced that he'd brought some appropriate decorations to make the party more suitable for a young lady. Before I could stop him, Frank started pulling princess decorations out of his bags, pink streamers, tiara-shaped balloons, and a huge banner that said "Happy Birthday Princess" in glittery letters. He began hanging these items over our dinosaur decorations, while explaining to anyone who would listen that little girls should have princess parties, not boring educational themes. I was speechless. Ruby looked confused and upset as her grandfather started covering up all the decorations we'd spent weeks planning. Some of the other parents were staring, and I could see kids pointing at the mismatched decorations and whispering to each other. My husband immediately intervened and asked his father what he thought he was doing. Frank replied that he was saving the party and making it more appropriate for Ruby's age and gender. He said she'd appreciate having a real little girl's party instead of this confusing dinosaur nonsense. Ruby, bless her heart, marched right up to her grandfather and told him she didn't want princess decorations because this was a dinosaur party. She explained very seriously that she'd invited her friends to learn about paleontology, not to play dress-up, and that she needed him to put her dinosaur banners back up. Frank's response was to pat Ruby on the head and tell her that she was just confused because we'd been filling her head with inappropriate interests. He said that once she saw how much fun a princess party could be, she'd realised that dinosaurs were for boys and she should focus on more feminine hobbies. I finally found my voice and told Frank that he needed to stop redecorating our party immediately. This was Ruby's birthday. She'd specifically requested a dinosaur theme, and we weren't changing it to suit his personal preferences about what little girls should like. Frank got defensive and said he was just trying to help Ruby develop proper interests. He claimed that encouraging her dinosaur obsession was setting her up for social problems later, and that other parents were probably judging us for not steering her toward more traditional activities. The dinosaur presenter, who had been watching this whole exchange with obvious confusion, finally stepped in. He mentioned that about half of his audience at educational events were girls, and that many of the world's leading paleontologists were women. He said Ruby was one of the most knowledgeable kids he'd ever met, and that her passion for science should be celebrated. Frank dismissed the presenter's comments and continued hanging his princess decorations. He said he didn't care what some stranger thought about child development and that he knew what was best for his granddaughter. He started removing our dinosaur centerpieces and replacing them with plastic tiaras and fairy wands he'd brought. At this point, Ruby started crying. She'd been looking forward to this party for months, and her grandfather was systematically destroying everything she'd been excited about. She kept asking why he was taking away her dinosaurs and replacing them with things she didn't want. Several of the party guests were getting uncomfortable with the tension, and some parents were starting to gather their kids to leave early. The whole celebration was falling apart because Frank couldn't accept that his granddaughter had interests that didn't fit his narrow definition of femininity. My husband finally snapped. He told his father that he had exactly 2 minutes to remove all of his decorations and leave the party, or he'd be escorted out by security. Frank acted shocked that his son would speak to him that way, especially in front of all these people. Frank tried to rally support from the other parents, explaining that he was just trying to make the party more appropriate and that surely they understood his concerns about gender-appropriate activities. Most of the adults just stared at him in disbelief, and one mum actually told him that his behaviour was completely inappropriate. When Frank realised that nobody was going to back him up, he got angry. He started ranting about how we were ruining Ruby's childhood by encouraging her unnatural interests, and that she'd grow up confused about her identity because we wouldn't guide her toward proper feminine activities. He said he was trying to save her from becoming one of those weird girls who couldn't relate to other children. The final straw came when Frank grabbed Ruby's fossil collection from the display table and announced that he was taking it home until she was old enough to appreciate more appropriate toys. Ruby absolutely lost it, sobbing that those were her special rocks and that she needed them for her presentation. That's when my husband physically removed his father from the party. He took the fossils back, handed them to Ruby, and told Frank that he was no longer welcome at family events until he could learn to respect his granddaughter's interests and our parenting decisions. Frank left shouting about how we were destroying Ruby's femininity and that he'd tried to save the party, but we were too stubborn to accept help. He said we'd regret not listening to him when Ruby grew up socially maladjusted because we'd encouraged her weird hobbies instead of teaching her to be a proper young lady. After Frank left, we had to spend 20 minutes removing all of his princess decorations and trying to restore the dinosaur theme. The presenter was incredibly understanding and even extended his program to make up for the time lost dealing with the disruption. Ruby eventually stopped crying and got back into party mode, but I could tell the whole incident had shaken her. She kept asking why Grandpa didn't like her dinosaurs and whether there was something wrong with girls learning about paleontology. We reassured her that there was absolutely nothing wrong with her interests and that Grandpa was just confused about what makes a good party. The dinosaur expert backed us up, sharing stories about famous female paleontologists and telling Ruby that her knowledge was impressive for someone her age. The party ended up being a success, despite Frank's interference. Ruby had a great time with her friends, learned some new dinosaur facts, and got to show off her fossil collection. But the whole experience was tainted by her grandfather's attempt to impose his outdated gender expectations on her special day. Ruby, for her part, has bounced back remarkably well. She's still obsessed with dinosaurs, and she's even more determined to become a paleontologist when she grows up. She started telling people that girls can like whatever they want, and that anyone who disagrees is just confused about science. I'm proud of how she handled the situation, and I'm glad we stood firm against Frank's attempts to shame her interests. But I'm also sad that her 7th birthday will always be remembered as the day her grandfather tried to force her to be someone she's not. That story really captures something important about how some people believe their opinions about what others should like or be are more important than the actual happiness of the people they claim to love. Frank genuinely thought he was helping Ruby by trying to force her into traditional gender roles. He couldn't see that he was actually causing harm, even when she was crying in front of him. We're getting toward the end of tonight's stories, but I want to share a few more that touch on different aspects of betrayal and trust. My sister expects me to pay for her son's entire birthday party because he has followers on social media. I'm 25 and I work as a nurse at a busy metropolitan hospital. It's demanding work, but I love what I do, and I've been able to save up some money for a down payment on my first apartment. My older sister, Rebecca, is 32 and has a 14-year-old son named Tyler, who she's convinced is going to be the next big social media star. Tyler started making videos about 2 years ago, and he's actually pretty good at it. He does comedy skits, dance videos, and reaction content that genuinely makes people laugh. He currently has around 80,000 followers, which is impressive for a teenager. But Rebecca acts like he's already a Hollywood celebrity. The problem is that Rebecca has completely reorganized her life around Tyler's social media career. She quit her job to be his full-time manager, even though he's not making significant money yet. She spends their entire budget on filming equipment, designer clothes for his videos, and promotional activities. Rebecca constantly talks about Tyler's follower count and engagement rates like they're stock prices. She screenshots comments from fans and shares them in our family group chat. She's created business cards for Tyler and has started charging appearance fees for him to attend local events. About a month ago, Rebecca called to tell me that Tyler's 15th birthday was coming up and that she was planning something special. She explained that this birthday was crucial for his brand development and that they needed to throw a party that would generate viral content. She had already started planning an elaborate celebration with a professional photographer, videographer, custom decorations, catered food, and party favors for all the guests. She estimated that the total cost would be around $8,000. When I asked how she planned to pay for such an expensive event, Rebecca explained that this was where I came in. She said that as Tyler's aunt and biggest supporter, I should want to invest in his future success. She framed the party expenses as a business investment rather than a personal celebration. Rebecca argued that Tyler's social media presence was bringing positive attention to our entire family and that supporting his career would benefit everyone. She said that successful influencers often had family members who helped fund their early content creation and that this party could be Tyler's breakthrough moment. I was shocked by her expectation that I should fund Tyler's birthday party, especially at such an outrageous price point. I told Rebecca that $8,000 was more than most people spend on weddings and that it seemed excessive for any child's birthday, regardless of their social media status. Rebecca became defensive and said that I didn't understand the influencer industry or how important it was to maintain a consistent brand image. She explained that Tyler's followers expected high-quality content and that a basic birthday party wouldn't generate the engagement they needed. She also guilt-tripped me by saying that Tyler had specifically mentioned wanting his aunt to help make his birthday special. She claimed that he'd been talking about how excited he was, that I might be involved in planning his celebration, and that disappointing him would damage our relationship. When I suggested that maybe the party budget should be more reasonable, Rebecca said that thinking small was exactly why most people never achieved success. She told me that Tyler had real potential to become a major influencer and that missing opportunities like this could set his career back significantly. I tried to explain that I had my own financial goals and that spending $8,000 on a party wasn't in my budget. Rebecca seemed genuinely surprised that I would prioritize my apartment fund over Tyler's birthday celebration. She asked what was more important than supporting family. She then offered to let me pay in installments, or to cover just specific aspects of the party like the photographer or the catering. She said that even a partial contribution would show Tyler that his family believed in his dreams and was willing to invest in his success. When I continued to decline, Rebecca's tone shifted from persuasive to accusatory. She said that I was being selfish and short-sighted and that I'd regret not supporting Tyler when he became famous. She accused me of being jealous of a teenager's success and of trying to hold him back. She also brought up times when our parents had helped me financially during college and suggested that I owed the family some reciprocal support. She said that Tyler's influencer career was equivalent to my nursing degree and deserved the same investment from family members. The conversation ended badly with Rebecca hanging up on me after saying that she'd remember who supported Tyler during his rise to fame and who didn't. She made it clear that she expected me to change my mind and that Tyler would be disappointed to learn about my lack of support. I stood firm in my decision not to fund the extravagant party, but I did offer to contribute a reasonable amount toward a more modest celebration. Rebecca rejected this compromise and said that anything less than her original vision would be inadequate for Tyler's brand. Eventually, Rebecca borrowed money from our parents and put the rest on credit cards to throw Tyler's dream birthday party. The event was indeed elaborate and generated plenty of social media content, but the financial stress it created for their family was obvious. The party photos looked amazing online, and Tyler's follower count did increase after the birthday content, but not enough to generate significant income. The return on investment for that $8,000 party was essentially zero. Months later, Rebecca is still struggling to pay off the party expenses and has started asking other family members for loans. Tyler himself seems embarrassed by his mother's financial sacrifice and has started making more modest content that doesn't require expensive production values. He's actually more relatable now that he's not constantly showcasing luxury items that his family couldn't afford. The whole experience taught me that some parents will sacrifice their financial security to fuel their children's dreams, even when those dreams are based more on social media metrics than realistic career planning. That story captures something really prevalent in our current culture. The idea that social media success is just around the corner if you invest enough, if you have the right content, if you project the right image. But the reality is that most people who try to become influencers don't make it, and the ones who do often got there through luck as much as effort. I want to share one more story before we wrap up tonight. This one is about a secret that was kept for decades and the devastation it caused when it finally came out. I found out my mother lied to me about my father for 40 years. My mother told me growing up that my biological father had left us and didn't want to see me. She said he had abandoned us when I was just a baby and had never shown any interest in being part of my life, so I never tried to reach out to him. Why would I want to contact someone who had rejected me? Fast forward to last year, when my mother was in the hospital for what we thought would be a routine procedure. She was scared and started talking about things she'd never mentioned before. That's when she told me the truth. My father hadn't abandoned us at all. He had tried to see me. He had called, written letters, and made every effort to be part of my life, but my mother had intercepted all of it. She told him that I didn't want to see him. She returned his letters unopened. She blocked his number. She systematically destroyed any chance I had of knowing my own father. And now he's dead. He passed away about 5 years before I found out the truth. All those years I thought he didn't care about me. He was wondering why his child wanted nothing to do with him. All those birthdays and holidays I spent alone thinking my father had abandoned me. He spent alone thinking I had rejected him. I can't describe the pain of learning that everything I believed about my childhood was a lie, that the father I thought had never wanted me had actually spent years trying to reach me, that the mother I trusted had deliberately kept us apart for reasons she still won't fully explain. When I confronted her about it, she got defensive. She said she did what she thought was best for me, that my father wasn't a good influence, that she was protecting me from disappointment. But none of that justifies lying to both of us for decades. None of that justifies denying me a relationship with my own father. The worst part is that I have so many questions now that can never be answered. What was he like? What did he want to tell me in those letters I never saw? Did he understand before he died that the rejection wasn't coming from me? Did he die thinking his child hated him? I've tried to find out more about him. I've connected with some relatives on his side who were shocked to learn the truth. They told me he talked about me often and that he never understood why I wouldn't see him. They showed me photos and told me stories. But it's not the same as knowing him myself. My relationship with my mother will never be the same. She stole something from me that can never be replaced. She didn't just lie. She destroyed the possibility of a relationship between me and my father. She let him die thinking I wanted nothing to do with him, and she let me live my whole life thinking he didn't care. Some lies are so big that there's no coming back from them. This is one of those lies. That story is perhaps the most painful one we've read tonight, because there's no resolution, no justice, no way to fix what was broken. Some damage is permanent, and all you can do is learn to live with it. As we wind down tonight's session, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that these stories are heavy. They deal with betrayal, broken trust, and the ways people can hurt each other, sometimes intentionally, and sometimes through selfishness they don't even recognize in themselves. But there's also something valuable in hearing these stories. They remind us that we're not alone in our struggles, that the complicated family dynamics and difficult relationships we navigate are universal experiences, that even when people hurt us, we can find ways to move forward and protect ourselves. The people in these stories made choices about boundaries. Some of them drew lines that others didn't understand. Some of them had to distance themselves from family members who couldn't treat them with basic respect. And some of them are still processing betrayals that changed the way they see the world. If any of these stories resonated with you, I hope you'll remember that setting boundaries isn't selfish, protecting yourself from people who hurt you isn't vindictive, and choosing not to sacrifice your well-being for people who wouldn't do the same for you isn't cruel. It's self-preservation. The Minecraft world has been spinning peacefully in the background this whole time, a calm counterpoint to the chaos of these human stories. Maybe that's part of why so many of you find these videos relaxing. Because no matter how complicated life gets, there's something soothing about watching a simple world where things make sense. I hope tonight's stories gave you something to think about, but I also hope they didn't stress you out too much. These are meant to be reflective, not distressing. Sometimes it helps to hear about other people's experiences, to process your own feelings through the lens of someone else's story. Before I go, I want to thank everyone who's been watching and supporting the channel. Your comments, your likes, and your subscriptions mean the world to me. This community we're building together is something special, and I'm grateful for every single one of you who takes the time to be part of it. If any of these stories hit close to home, remember that you deserve to be treated with respect. You deserve relationships built on trust and honesty. And you deserve to protect your peace, even if that means disappointing people who expect you to put their needs above your own. Take care of yourselves tonight, get some rest, and I'll see you in the next video with more stories, more Minecraft, and more time to just breathe and process together. Actually, before we end completely, let me share a few more stories. I know I said we were winding down, but these ones are worth telling, and I want to give you the full experience tonight. This next story is about a wedding dress that became the center of an absolute family meltdown. My entitled mother-in-law tried to steal my wedding dress because her daughter deserved it more. I'm 26, and I got married last month to the love of my life, David. The whole experience should have been magical, but my mother-in-law, Patricia, turned it into an absolute nightmare that I'm still processing weeks later. David and I had been together for 3 years before we got engaged, and during that time I thought I had a pretty good relationship with his family. Patricia was always sweet to my face, asking about my job, complimenting my cooking when we'd visit for Sunday dinners. She seemed genuinely excited when David proposed, immediately asking about wedding plans and offering to help however she could. The problem started when David's younger sister, Jessica, got engaged about 6 months after we did. Jessica is 23, works part-time at a boutique, and has always been the golden child who could do no wrong in Patricia's eyes. The moment Jessica announced her engagement, something shifted. Suddenly, every conversation with Patricia became a comparison between our two weddings. When I mentioned I'd found my dream dress, Patricia asked to see pictures. I was hesitant at first, but David encouraged me to share since she'd been so supportive. The dress was this gorgeous vintage-inspired gown with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing train that I'd saved up for months to afford. It cost me nearly $2,000, which was a huge stretch on my teacher's salary, but it was perfect. Patricia's reaction was interesting. She stared at the photo for a long time, then said it was beautiful, but maybe a bit too sophisticated for someone my age. I brushed off the comment, thinking she was just being protective, or maybe a little jealous that Jessica hadn't found her dress yet. 3 weeks before my wedding, I got a call from the bridal shop. The woman on the phone sounded confused and apologetic. She said someone claiming to be my mother had come in with a copy of my receipt and tried to take my dress, saying there had been a family emergency and they needed to move the pickup date. Fortunately, the shop has strict policies about dress pickup requiring photo identification, so they refused to release it. My blood ran cold. I immediately called Patricia, thinking maybe there was some misunderstanding. When she answered, her voice was strangely defensive, before I even said anything. I asked if she'd been to my bridal shop, and there was this long pause before she said she just wanted to surprise me by picking it up early so I wouldn't have to make the trip. That explanation might have made sense if it wasn't complete nonsense. The shop was literally 5 minutes from my apartment, and I had specifically scheduled my pickup for the weekend before the wedding because I wanted to do a final fitting. I told Patricia this, and she got flustered, saying she was just trying to help and didn't understand why I was being so suspicious. I let it go, but something felt wrong. I called the bridal shop back and asked them to describe the woman who tried to pick up my dress. The description matched Patricia perfectly, down to her distinctive red hair and the pearl earrings she always wore. But here's the kicker. When I asked what reason she'd given for the emergency pickup, the shop employee said she'd mentioned needing the dress for her daughter's wedding that weekend. My wedding was still 3 weeks away. Jessica's wedding wasn't for another 8 months. I confronted David about it that night, and he was just as confused as I was. He called his mum, and I could hear her getting increasingly agitated on the other end of the line. Finally, she admitted she'd gone to the shop, but she claimed it was because Jessica had fallen in love with my dress from the photos and was heartbroken that she couldn't have something similar. According to Patricia, Jessica had been crying for weeks about how unfair it was that I got the perfect dress while she was stuck with whatever leftovers she could find. Patricia said she just wanted to see if maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement where Jessica could wear the dress for her wedding since hers was so much later and I could find something else. I was speechless. She was seriously suggesting that I give up the dress I'd saved for and dreamed about so her daughter could wear it instead. When I pointed out that Jessica could literally order the exact same dress from the same designer, Patricia said it wouldn't be the same because mine was the original and Jessica deserved to have something special for her big day. David was furious. He told his mother that what she'd done was completely inappropriate and that she owed me an apology. Patricia's response was that she didn't understand why I was being so selfish when family should help each other and that Jessica was going through such a hard time planning her wedding on a tight budget. The irony was incredible. I was a teacher making $35,000 a year while Jessica lived rent-free with her parents and had her father paying for her entire wedding. But somehow I was the selfish one for wanting to wear the dress I'd bought with my own money to my own wedding. The situation escalated when Jessica called me directly, crying and begging me to let her borrow the dress. She said she'd seen the photos and it was exactly what she'd always dreamed of wearing, and it wasn't fair that I got it first just because I was getting married sooner. She offered to pay me back the full price after her wedding, as if the money was the issue and not the fact that she wanted to wear my wedding dress to her own wedding. I told Jessica as gently as I could that I understood she loved the dress, but it was my wedding dress, and I wasn't comfortable lending it out. I suggested she look into having a similar one made, or finding the same designer. She hung up on me. The next day, Patricia showed up at my apartment unannounced. She had Jessica with her, and both of them looked like they'd been crying. Patricia launched into this speech about how family should support each other and how she was disappointed in my selfishness. She said she'd raised David to be generous and caring, and she couldn't understand how he'd chosen someone who wouldn't help his own sister in her time of need. Jessica chimed in, saying she'd never ask for anything again if I would just let her wear the dress, and that it would mean everything to her because she'd never be able to afford something so beautiful on her own. She said she'd looked everywhere and couldn't find anything that made her feel as special as she knew my dress would. I stood firm. I explained that I understood their disappointment, but the dress was important to me, and I'd worked hard to afford it. I offered to go shopping with Jessica to help her find something similar, or to put her in touch with the designer to see about ordering the same style. Patricia's mask completely dropped. She started yelling about how I was ruining Jessica's wedding and being vindictive because I was jealous of how close their family was. She said I was trying to drive a wedge between David and his family, and that if I really loved him, I'd make this sacrifice to keep the peace. When I still refused, Patricia actually tried to push past me into my apartment, saying she just wanted to see the dress and maybe we could work something out. I had to physically block the door while Jessica stood behind her crying about how unfair her life was. David came home right in the middle of this chaos. When he saw his mother trying to force her way into our apartment and his sister sobbing on the doorstep, he completely lost it. He told them both to leave immediately and not to contact us again until they were ready to apologize for their behavior. Patricia's parting shot was that I was destroying their family and that she'd never forgive me for breaking Jessica's heart over a stupid dress. She said I was selfish and materialistic and that she hoped I'd be happy ruining her daughter's special day. The wedding went ahead as planned and I wore my beautiful dress, but the whole experience was tainted by the drama and the fact that David's family wasn't there. Patricia had convinced Jessica and several other family members to boycott the wedding in solidarity, claiming I was being unreasonable and cruel. David was heartbroken about his family's absence, but he stood by me completely. He said he was disgusted by his mother's behaviour and couldn't believe she tried to manipulate and guilt-trip me into giving up something that was rightfully mine. We got some beautiful photos, and I felt absolutely stunning in my dress. But every time I look at them now, I remember the stress and drama Patricia caused during what should have been the happiest time of my life. The aftermath has been ongoing. Patricia still hasn't apologised, and she's been telling extended family members her version of events, painting me as the villain who refused to help Jessica in her time of need. Some relatives have actually reached out to ask why I couldn't just share the dress, as if that's a normal request. Jessica ended up finding a different dress that she claims to love, though Patricia makes passive-aggressive comments about how it's not as special as mine would have been. She's also started making digs about how some people care more about material things than family relationships. David has gone low contact with his mother and sister, which makes me feel guilty even though I know their behaviour was completely out of line. He says he doesn't regret standing up for me, but I can see how much it hurts him to have this rift in his family. Looking back, there were probably signs I missed. Little comments about how Jessica deserved the best things in life, or how it was unfair that she had to work so hard for what she wanted. Patricia had always favoured Jessica, but I thought that was just normal parent-child dynamics. Now I know better. Patricia doesn't see me as family. She sees me as an obstacle to giving Jessica everything she wants. And when I refused to step aside and hand over my wedding dress, I became the enemy. That story really shows how entitlement can be passed down through families. Patricia raised Jessica to believe she deserved whatever she wanted, and when reality didn't bend to accommodate that belief, they both became hostile toward anyone who stood in their way. Here's another story about someone who discovered that their closest friend wasn't who they thought they were. My childhood best friend betrayed me in a way I could never have imagined. We had known each other since we were 5 years old. 20 years of friendship, shared secrets, family dinners, vacations together. She was the sister I never had. When I got my dream job at a marketing firm, she was the first person I called to celebrate. When I started dating my boyfriend, she was the first person I introduced him to. She knew everything about my life, and I thought I knew everything about hers. What I didn't know was that she had been secretly recording our private conversations for months. She recorded me venting about my boss. She recorded me complaining about my family. She recorded me sharing insecurities about my relationship that I would never have said to anyone else. I found out when my boss called me into her office one day and asked if I had anything to share. Apparently someone had sent her audio clips of me saying unflattering things about the company during what I thought were private phone calls with my best friend. I was terminated that same day. Months of hard work, building a career I loved, destroyed in an afternoon because someone I trusted had violated that trust in the most fundamental way possible. But it didn't stop there. Somehow, those same recordings made their way to my boyfriend. He heard me talking about doubts I had early in our relationship, fears that I had worked through privately with my friend. Things I would never have said to him because they weren't really about him, they were about my own anxiety. But without context, they sounded terrible. He left me 2 weeks after I lost my job. In the span of a month, I lost my career, my relationship, and my best friend. And for what? I still don't fully understand why she did it. When I finally confronted her, she was defensive and evasive. She said some things about jealousy, about feeling like I always got everything I wanted while she struggled. She said she had been going through a hard time and made bad decisions. But recording someone without their consent, sending those recordings to destroy their career and relationship, that's not a bad decision. That's calculated destruction. That's looking at someone who trusts you completely and choosing to use that trust as a weapon. The aftermath was brutal. I had to move back in with my parents because I couldn't afford my apartment without a job. I spent months looking for work, knowing that my former employer would never give me a positive reference. I went to therapy to try to process the betrayal. The hardest part was realizing that the person I had confided in for 20 years had never really been my friend. She had been collecting ammunition, waiting for the right moment to use it. And when she decided to destroy my life, she did it without hesitation. I've rebuilt since then. New job, new relationship, new friends who I'm more careful about trusting. But I'll never be the same. That kind of betrayal changes you at a fundamental level. It makes you question every relationship you have. It makes you second guess every vulnerable moment you share with someone. She tried to reach out to me a few months ago. She said she wanted to apologize, that she had been in therapy and realized how wrong she was. But I didn't respond. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. And I've learned that protecting myself sometimes means walking away from people who want back into my life after they've shown me exactly who they are. That story really captures the long-lasting impact of betrayal. It's not just about the immediate damage. It's about how it changes you going forward, how it affects your ability to trust, how it reshapes the way you see human relationships. Let me share one more story before we truly end tonight. This one is about parents who kicked out their child and then came crawling back when their circumstances changed. My parents booted me out at 18 and left me homeless. 10 years later, they lost everything and broke into my home to squat while I was away. The day after I turned 18, my parents told me I was no longer welcome in their house. They said they'd raised me long enough and it was time for me to figure things out on my own. They gave me one garbage bag to pack my belongings and pushed me out the door. I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't have savings because they had never allowed me to work while living under their roof, claiming it would distract from my studies. I had no car, no job prospects, and no support system because they had systematically isolated me from extended family. For months, I slept on park benches and in homeless shelters. I ate at soup kitchens and scraped together change for bus fare to job interviews. It was the hardest period of my life, but it was also when I discovered what I was capable of. I worked my way up from nothing, fast food jobs, then retail, then office work, then management positions. I went to community college at night while working full-time during the day. I got scholarships and loans and eventually transferred to a 4-year university. I graduated with honours and got a job that paid more than my parents had ever made. By the time I was 28, I owned my own home. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I had earned every square foot of it through years of grinding and sacrifice. I had turned the worst experience of my life into motivation to become someone my parents said I could never be. Then the economic downturn hit and my parents' business failed. They had never saved anything, had never planned for retirement, had never considered that their income might not last forever. Within 2 years, they had lost everything. Their house, their cars, their lifestyle. I heard about it through a distant cousin who had reconnected with me on social media. My parents were living with relatives who were getting tired of supporting them. They were talking about how unfair life had been to them, conveniently leaving out the part where they had thrown away their own child without a second thought. When they found out I was doing well, they started reaching out, first through relatives, then directly. They wanted to reconcile. They said they had made mistakes. They wanted to be a family again. I ignored them. After what they had done, after years of rebuilding myself from nothing, I wasn't interested in pretending we had a relationship worth saving. Then they took things further than I ever imagined they would. I went on a business trip for 2 weeks, and when I came home, I found my parents living in my house. They had broken a window to get in and had been staying there the whole time I was gone. Eating my food, sleeping in my bed, using my utilities. They had even started receiving mail at my address. When I demanded they leave, they refused. They said they had a right to be there because I was their child, and family doesn't abandon family. The irony of that statement, coming from people who had literally abandoned me on my 18th birthday, was not lost on me. I had to call the police to remove them. It was one of the most surreal experiences of my life, watching officers escort my parents out of my home while they screamed about how ungrateful I was, how they had raised me and deserved better treatment. Raised me. They had raised me until I was 18 and then thrown me away like garbage. And now they expected me to support them because blood was supposed to mean something. The police helped me file for a restraining order. My parents tried to fight it in court, claiming they had nowhere else to go, and I was being cruel by refusing to help them. The judge was not sympathetic. He pointed out that they had made me homeless at 18 and had no legal claim to my property or my support. They bounced around after that, staying with different relatives until those relationships soured too. Last I heard, they were living in a run-down apartment on the other side of the state, still complaining about how their children had abandoned them. They never acknowledge what they did to me. In their version of events, they're the victims. I don't feel guilty about any of it. They made their choice when I was 18 and helpless. I made my choice when they were 60 and helpless. The difference is, I earned the right to make that choice. I built a life from nothing, while they squandered everything they had. And when they came looking for the safety net they had denied me, they found exactly what they deserved. Nothing. These stories we've shared tonight, they all have something in common. They're about people learning that the relationships they thought they could count on weren't what they seemed. Parents who prioritized themselves over their children. Friends who betrayed trust for their own gain. Family members who believed their desires outweighed everyone else's rights. But they're also about resilience, about people who found ways to protect themselves, to set boundaries, to move forward despite the pain. That's the part I want you to take with you tonight. Not just the betrayals, but the survival. Not just the pain, but the strength that comes from getting through it. Life is complicated. Relationships are complicated. And sometimes the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally are the ones who hurt us the most. But we can learn from their failures. We can choose to be different. We can build families and friendships based on mutual respect and genuine care, not obligation and manipulation. If you're going through something like what these people experienced, know that you're not alone. Know that setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person. Know that choosing yourself when others won't choose you is not selfish, it's survival. The Minecraft world has been our peaceful backdrop tonight, and I hope it's helped create a calm space for processing these heavy stories. There's something meditative about watching those blocks drift by while we talk about the messier parts of human experience. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for being part of this community, and thank you for trusting me with your attention and your peace. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to the people who deserve it, and remember that you have the power to protect your own well-being, no matter what anyone else expects from you. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.